Hey, I just wanted to say, your dog's kind of ugly.
You just gotta say.
What did
And
you do
Joe
with that?
just won his first Tech Deck karaoke. Congratulations, Joe. Wow, you did it.
No, I hate you, but I just gotta say, you're a horrible, horrible human being. Gotta say it.
Wow. Two thumbs down for both Joe and Chris.
Wow. Looks like I get to win this one. All right, cool.
That's right.
Here we go. Everybody get your composure.
Mm-hmm.
I've never had that. All right. Hello. Back up and back up. All right. Hello and welcome to another episode of Tech Deck Karaoke. This week we are being joined by an old friend and colleague, Chris Williams, somebody who I have spent a great deal of time communicating with, a technologist I love to hear from and engage with, and somebody who I've been on even his podcasts and had some great discussions around all sorts of stuff. So Chris, Cloud Therapist Williams, please introduce yourself.
Hey, everybody. My name is Chris Williams. I am currently a cloud therapist and principal cloud solutions architect. I'm in the process of changing positions. I'm becoming a developer relations manager for HashiCorp in the near future, but currently I'm a cloud therapist.
Excellent.
Once a cloud therapist, always a cloud therapist.
Always.
Right.
I believe that was Confucius.
I have a joke that I can't say about that.
Those are the worst kinds of jokes.
Excellent. So before I ask a couple of interesting questions about that transition from architect to avocado, we will introduce Miss Sabrina Schaefer Esquire, our impartial judge. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. Hello, everyone. Ready for another successful Tech Deck karaoke. I'm rooting for you, Joe. I'm really rooting for you, despite all of your previous losses. And ignore the laughter. I mean, clearly we're all rooting for you.
Are you like 0-45 now? What's going on?
Yeah,
somewhere in the realm of that. Yeah.
You're not doing great.
It's just like Mom always said about me. I am a consistent loser.
Oh. Well, and the therapy begins.
So before we begin, just because I think that's such an interesting transition you're making.
Yep.
If I'm correct, in your previous role, the role you're transitioning out of, you were helping customers understand how cloud adoption would look, how it would work, helping to architect the migration and or deployment of cloud solutions and applications. Is that correct?
And also interim director of DevOps for certain companies. I was a fractional CTO, lot of consultative work and technological work too. So I did some hands-on keyboard still, even in my dotage.
Makes sense. And so that in those roles, that's a very deep tech SME level role with obviously some broad architectural chops. And so now you'll be going into developer relationships where you're focused more on kind of a single product and the development and growth and deployment of that product. Is that fair?
The entire line of Hashi products, yeah. But effectively, yeah. It's a big change. I've never been it's colloquially known as vendor trash. I've never been vendor trash before, so it's going to be. So I've been doing the podcast and I've been doing community efforts and I've been a vExpert and an AWS hero for a number of years. And that by itself kind of like lends towards developer relations. So during the day I was a CPSA, but at night for free in my spare time, I was a DevRel effectively. And so now they have talked me into coming over, flipping to the dark side. And I'm going to do during the day what I used to do at night for free, paid.
It's brilliant. And you know what? We've got apparently some magnetism towards the DevRel community. You will be at least the third full-time DevRel here or avocado. We had Tim Davis, Marino Wijay, and now Chris Williams. So we've got some of the best down here.
Wow. Yeah, no
pressure. I love Tim and Marino too. That's fantastic.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, that'll be very interesting. So Continuum is actually, we've been thinking about starting our own little community, right? Like the AWS has their heroes and Cisco has their champions. And we were thinking about the Continuum trash bags. I think that would be.
For the record, that has not been approved or ever discussed.
I thought you were going to go with like the Continuum Toonies or something like that, but
No, I don't know that we're ready for a community yet, but we will see in the future. So I believe if you are ready, I am going to knock your socks off presenting your information as if it was rote.
I am salivating to see this.
Just yesterday, yet again, someone's like, come on, there's no way. And I'm like, I promise you, any tech, you name it. And he doesn't see it beforehand. So I can confirm yet again, Joe, you've not seen this deck prior. Chris, you just sent it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, sure enough, he has not seen it and does not look at the deck prior.
For our audience that questions this, what I will always let you know is I am not smart enough to cheat. I do not have the intelligence or the drive to take the time to cheat.
It's so exhausting. I just rather just study it.
I am too lazy for that.
Or embarrass yourself in public, like Joe. Either way.
Exactly. My life exists as a warning for others.
And there is once again that common thread of fearlessness and lack of embarrassment. I do not feel whatever the embarrassment gene is. I don't have it.
Yeah, and it ties back. I think it was Marino Wijay that said on a previous show that one of the biggest tips he can give is learn in public, and to learn in public, you have to get rid of some of that fear.
Yep, and that's why we started V Brown Bag. It was to learn in public and help people skill up and study for their certifications and everything. So we had to be really good so that we could actually show it to other people.
100%. All right. Without further ado, enough stalling on my end. I will bring up these slides. Without further ado, for the second time, I'm going to use that segue because I am just not that good with segues. We're going to be talking about Terraform 101. So this is the basics of Terraform. We're going to be looking at how Terraform can help me with infrastructure as code, or IAC, as a systems administrator or sysadmin. So I am not Chris Williams. I am not intelligent. I am not attractive like Chris. I am not relevant like Chris.
But you still have your hair and an amazing beard too.
I am not a principal cloud solutions architect. I am occasionally a technology therapist, and I am not an AWS hero. But Chris is all those things. I am your host, and that's all I can offer. Who is this deck for? That was my first question when I opened it up, having no idea what's coming next. So when I'm thinking about who this deck is for, what this slide is telling me is that it's for sysadmins who are scared of code. Don't be scared of code. You're already familiar with code, right? You've already mastered the complexity of the command line. If you can use Linux as an average user, you can code. Trust me, that is the most complex thing you can ever do, is master the Linux operating system. Code is not that scary. DevOps curious people, this is a deck for you. People who enjoy making fun of Chris or me, this is a great deck for you. So if you're one of these three people or one of these three groups, welcome. And you are in the right place. If you're not one of these people, it's time to GTFO. Actually, it is not. Stick around. I think you'll still enjoy something, or at least have a great time laughing at me. So in the olden days, or ye olden days, when cavemen were using rocks to break flint into sharp tools, we did things like buy servers. We bought switches. We bought racks to put them in. And then we cut our hands to bloody pieces using cage nuts to screw those pieces into those racks. And we ended up with these stumps of hands that you see in our sysadmins today. We then moved a step further. We looked at these two groups, maybe Caveman or Cavewoman 1 and Cavewoman 2, where they were a team of developers and a team of operations. And this is where most IT challenges started to arise. When we decided that rather than work together to create an IT tool, we should break up into silos to create IT complexity, we started rolling downhill. And so what you started to see is you had a team responsible for the operating environment. all of those servers, switches, storage arrays, and cage nuts. And then you had a team responsible for developing, maintaining, and running applications. And never the two should meet. So an application team would develop an application on their laptop, and then they would throw it over a proverbial fence to another caveman or cavewoman who would take it and try and run it on these racks of servers. Well, it would never work right on the servers. And so they would yell over the fence and say, "It doesn't work. Your app is broken." And the app team would yell back and say, "It's not our app. It worked fine on my laptop." And they'd go, "Well, this isn't a laptop." And it would continue to spiral downhill. That was the olden days. Conflicting metrics for success. How do we measure success? On the ops team, maybe we're measured success by the operational uptime of the infrastructure. But the app team doesn't necessarily care about that if the app isn't still connecting and serving users. So how do we marry these metrics across these teams and that proverbial fence? Next comes in these infrastructure as code concepts. So now we've got a really interesting thing happening. We had a team that understood code. They were the dev team. And we had a team that understood infrastructure, servers, switches, storage, and the way they interoperate. And that was our ops team or operations team. Now we're looking at infrastructure as code. We're going to have a problem with that proverbial fence really quick as we start to look at this. So this is why you started to see things like DevOps and Agile and any other word, buzzword, or term you want to use in that bucket to exist. We had to start to bleed these lines. Now, why do we want to bleed the lines into infrastructure as code? First, it allows us to accelerate the deployment, configuration changes, and management of our infrastructure, which is nice. Second, it allows us to begin to take some of the major advantages we get in the way in which we write code, develop code, and change code. Things like the code repositories and the change management of code, the rollback and the configuration management that can happen within code. So as we start to look at using our infrastructure as code in an IAC concept, we can also take advantage of a lot of the things that we've built into the operational model of deploying, changing, and managing code. So now we get the ability to look at our infrastructure in the way in which it's configured from a software perspective. And so this is the basics of where we start to move towards things like automation and start to build in true automation. Now, if you're the sysadmin who's scared of code and doesn't want to learn how to operate on GitHub or how to code Python, remember that you already use tools like code to get your job done across the board. In the network world, if you were the network administrator, you've probably been doing things like copy and pasting switch config for years. That is a really rudimentary wannabe code operation to take the configuration of one switch and replicate it across more than one switch. You might even be pulling that stuff out of an Excel spreadsheet at a large enterprise financial to this day. There are a lot of ways we look and have used these things to do this in the past. What we're really adding to our old school automation with infrastructure as code is the ability to add in more intelligent logic, the ability to utilize this in a more intelligent fashion, the ability to put in things like if then else statements. So if configuration A fails, don't run the next 62,000 lines of config code. Now, what we start to get from this is the ability to take what does this configuration look like in my dashboard and define it in a code format. What we'll end up seeing is a lot of parallels between these two, but also the way that as an administrator, I can begin to get my feet wet with understanding the code. I can pull up my code lines on the right next to my visual GUI dashboard on the left and begin to marry the two back and forth so that I can understand how these things are being deployed. So what do I get out of this? What do I get out of this infrastructure as code? It's great for replication. If I need to copy A into B as an exact copy, it's stupendous for that. And I've been waiting to use the word stupendous in a sentence for years.
You did great, Joe. You did that right. Good job. Nice job. Yeah, nailed it.
So we can take a development environment. We can spin up exact copies of it. When and where might I want to do this? Well, I might want a clean development environment, fresh and ready for any given set of developing or testing purposes I'm going to use. And so this lets me automate that clean, fresh development platform. This allows me to break it down and build it back up whenever I need to refresh it and ensure that I'm always working with a consistent baseline that's rapidly deployed. I can replicate out that development environment into a production environment. And then I can get into that production environment if required and make specific changes that might do things like tighten down security for an actual production deployment, and then create the ability to replicate that out. I can replicate this out as many times as I need into different environments, remaining or retrieving, not retrieving or remaining, I'm using all the wrong words, maintaining that original baseline while being able to make configuration changes for specificity wherever I require across that UAT, that perf, or that STG environment. I can use tools like HashiCorp's Terraform to be able to do this. And within that, I'll be able to use the syntax of HCL, or Hashi's configuration language. I'll be able to use a common syntax to deploy my infrastructure when and where I need. And that common syntax is based on very simple coding parameters, or very simple basic coding logic. Things like key value pairs. Here is the key or the item. This is the value I want to store in that item. We can bring that down and define objects like resources, and be able to define the specific parameters of those objects. So we can very easily begin to build out a reusable model that can replicate out our infrastructure in a code world. Taking a block name, using that resource type. Here is a resource. This is going to be the object I'm working with. The type of this resource is going to be the AWS instance. And then I'm going to name that AWS instance my 101 server, because this is Terraform 101. And I am learning this on the fly with you. So how special is that? Then we can put in arguments at the bottom. What are our arguments that attach that resource? So in here, we're going to need this AMI code. We're also going to need to dictate what type of instance type it is. So in this case, we're talking about what type of cloud instance do we want to spin up when we spin up this resource. So this becomes so simple to learn for those of you that are code scared that I'm literally learning it in real time as I'm explaining it. It's easy stuff. The basics here all starts with getting the crap beat out of you with some sledgehammers. Any good learning process is going to involve some pain and some learning the hard way. What you want to ensure you do is what it looks like this gentleman failed to do. Protect your most sensitive areas while getting beaten with the sledgehammer. And to do that, we're going to start off with the basic tools that we've been discussing. We're going to look at things like, again, being very careful with sensitive parts of your body as you're learning. The gentleman here is going to learn the hard way that while he may have the posture to do a nice headstand, the recoil of the rifle could become extremely painful in certain situations. So to avoid that pain, let's understand some basics of where our pain would come from as we're learning this. First basic we want to understand is our variables, right? What are the things that are going to change from time to time? So we've got our resource, our object that we created over here, this Terraform example. This is going to be tagged with that server tag. And if you're not familiar with tagging, you can go back to our Tim Davis Tech Deck Karaoke episode and learn all about the importance of tagging. Then we're going to have some variables. We're going to have some things that will change from time to time that we want to define. In this case, we've got an AMI that will change so that it can be unique when required, right? In this case, it will be unique per AWS region. We also need to have a variable for the instance type. We could use multiple different instances for given applications across our environment. And then variables for things like the project names. So what this allows us to do is have static code that creates a baseline that we can use variables to make specificity changes where required. So that's your 101 of Terraform, or 101 of coding. We can see here, we're going to pull that variable name. We're going to match the var instance type back to the variable instance type definition on the right. And then we're going to match the variable for the project name back to the defined variable on the right. So again, what this is allowing us to do is have our code on the left always deploy the same baseline while pulling specificity instances out of variables that are defined elsewhere. So if we want to play along and we want to get some hands-on, we're going to go through a play along demo. What you need to do this is installed Terraform, AWS command line, Git, and VS Code. I'm pretty sure you could probably switch out another GUI coding entity that you like for VS Code if you're not a fan of VS Code. But if you're not a fan of VS Code, what's wrong with you? You're going to need an AWS account. The thing to remember about AWS accounts is you can almost always start and try things for free, but at some point it will start charging you and it will not let you know that that's happening. And if you're not paying attention, you could end up with really big bills. So if you're going to spin up free stuff in AWS, spin it back down. Guess how you can do that? With code. You're also going to need an identity and access management or IAM account within AWS and a GitHub and GitLab account. For the most part, all of this is going to take you 15 to 20 minutes to sign up for. It will require no costs, no expenditures. The beauty of learning this way is that you can avoid a lot of those interesting pains by getting your feet wet in a sandbox environment and trying this out. It really isn't that daunting. And that's what I want you to leave with is go in, get started, download these resources, start playing around. And what you'll quickly find is that with a little bit of effort up front, you can admin things much faster on the back end, but also reduce the risk of human error by building in proper infrastructure as code principles. And that is what I assume Chris wanted to talk about.
Yay!
Not an easy deck, Chris.
Sabrina, you're muted.
I was going to say, how terrible was it? Not even close, huh? Not even close.
Oh, no. Wait. So I'm going to break the fourth wall for a second here. Am I supposed to disparage Joe mercilessly at this point, or actually say the truth?
Yeah, no. If it really was good, you could say. I did notice in the chat, I was looking for a way to chat you back that you're like, I made this way too easy. And I'm like, oh no, here we go.
Joe did great. So the there was a couple of sticking points, and I will admit I actually did deliberately put in some red herrings and MacGuffins in that one just to see where Joe would go with it. And,
red herrings and MacGuffins. I like the cut of your jib, sir.
I tell you what, I've been having a ducky day. It's so Terraform is a fun and easy to pick up language for people that are just getting into it. It's something that that's easy to comprehend and difficult to master. You can as you pick things up with it, you start learning that you can very, very quick, like with 3 lines of code, you can create an EC2 instance in your AWS account. It's that easy to get started. What you then start doing is as you, so the guy getting whacked on the rail and the other guy acting as the tripod for his, the rifle tripod for his friend, what that section denoted was that so it was exactly what I just said. You can get started very easily, but if you are not careful, you can do things. Should you? No. You don't want to be the sandbag for your buddy's rifle using your nards. You can do that with Terraform. You absolutely should not do that. There's a lot of best practices that if you don't read the documentation and RTFM, that you will very quickly spiral into a world of pain.
Absolutely, and I love this because I think when you're looking at this, it can be daunting. The idea of coding is daunting, and right, especially if you're coming from a true administrator world where you're thinking about building business user apps. That's not what we're talking about right here. We're talking about infrastructure as code, which is a much lower barrier to entry than
Correct.
writing full-on applications, right? But it's also it's something that not only is it doable by most any of us, but we no longer live in the world of IT where I grew up and you probably grew up, where it was the keeper of knowledge, where my value was the knowledge I have, and if I share it with you, my value goes down. We're in a world of knowledge sharing, especially in the developer community, especially in these infrastructure as code communities. So you can go get your feet wet and you can go try this out and you can ask questions and you can on the fly and you will get the help and resources you need. The only thing I can say is you might catch a little flack for asking really stupid questions on the developer forums. So just use a fake name, and about 6 months in, when you start to get your feet under you, change that name to something else so you're not attached to all those idiot questions you asked up front.
Might I recommend
Overflow,
Joe
so
Onisic as your fake name?
Yeah, Stack Overflow is brutal. When I first started learning Python a couple of years ago, I just started asking random questions, and people I think I have like negative karma because I was asking questions like how do I get my Pi environment to like work properly on the new AMD chipset for the M1 laptops, and people are like, boo, somebody already asked this 13 years ago. What are you doing? Get out of here, boy. I'm like, oh yeah, man.
There are always people whose ego is based on putting other people down because there's nothing else to fill it with, and so you just got to figure out how to avoid them.
Right. So Joe did a great job. There was a lot of history that leads up to the whys and the wherefores of why you need infrastructure. Why infrastructure as code is a good idea today versus where it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. How the pace of innovation and the velocity of ideation to production level ready environments has gone from years to minutes. It's been a significant velocity change, and infrastructure as code is the predominant way to do that. Learning a little bit of code, learning how to instead of taking that cut and paste. I love that analogy that you used, Joe, of taking the old rolling your eyes. No, don't love anything Joe does.
What, you hate it? Huh? Why do you hate it so much? Huh?
Cutting and pasting the router configs and copying them into the next ISDN router down the line, and then changing the IP address was how we did things. Mm-hmm. Now we have a variable file, and we specify out all of the different IP addresses that we're going to need, and then reference that from the main.tf file. Speaking about Terraform specifically, and then let it do its own thing, and that doesn't even get into like some of the more advanced programmatic concepts like if-then loops, while looping, setting up multiple environments, using tagging so that your production environment and dev environment run from the same module, but grab different size DC2 instances, smaller ones for dev, bigger ones for production, all of that stuff. And once you master that, once you get into that mindset, it even for a crusty old sysadmin like myself, I'm like, oh my God, this is so much easier now. This is amazing. Now the other side of that, the flip side of that, is that you can build yourself an amazingly efficient foot gun and get yourself into a world of pain very, very fast, as opposed to.
Well, there's an old, and I don't know where to attribute it, but there's an old quote, and it's "To err is human. To apply that error to 1,000 servers at once is automation."
Yes, exactly.
But I look back in the days. I remember sitting there at an SP size shop, service provider size shop, and watching router config be paced from router to router to router as they were bringing up a series of new routers. Well, what would happen in those old days of copy and paste config was command number 7 out of 3,000 would bomb out. And then you'd watch 2,993 more commands bomb out because the preceding command that everything was relying upon, like enabling VLANs or something basic, didn't happen. So everything else dies, right? And so being able to just add the slightest intelligence, we don't have to get into like for loops and while loops and all that fun stuff, but just the slightest logic into the way we deploy code helps automation not be that garbage pail that it has been in the past.
Right. Learning how to throw in an exception block so that if it does crap out at 7, it just knows to break and then stop, and then you can exactly. It's
well, take us through this, Chris. Are you ready?
Yeah, totally.
I want to see this. Sabrina wants to see the solid win here for me.
Yeah, how's it done right? That's what I really want to know. How do you present this correctly?
All right.
I appreciate you keeping me grounded. My ego just doesn't have a chance to grow here, and that's helpful for the world, really.
Okay, so I'm gonna skip the introduction slides. I'll skip the who this is for. Joe did a fantastic job on Ye Olden Days. That he distilled the pain and angst that we went through very, very succinctly. So I'm going to hop through that. We still have the capability. The administrator still has the ability to do the same things that they did previously. The AWS console is where you can go to point and click. Much like the vCenter servers and the Windows boxes and your Active Directory GUI, you can still click around and figure out how to do things from the console, which is great when you've got the training wheels on. It's good as you're learning how to interface with your first VPC and your first EC2 instance and all of those things. But what's happening when you're in the console is you are actually just making an API call to the back end. So everything that you're doing, when you click on that button, it is a programmatic interface that is happening that you should get to know about. You need to learn that. And once you've learned that clicking on the upper left-hand corner equals this kind of call using this form of credential authentication, because you've set up AWS configure, you can programmatize, if that's a word, the whole thing. So this, lost my focus. This is that capability writ large. Instead of using what we see on the left, as you mature in your learning and understanding of cloud environments, whether that be AWS or Azure or GCP, or even on-prem with vCenter, VMware, Oracle, what have you, there's so many providers and so many modules out there that Terraform allows you to interface with and build things using that backend API. So to get into the concepts, what we want to talk. So Joe actually did this one really good too. I know Sabrina. I know you hate to hear that.
I don't even know if I want to be friends anymore. Actually, I thought we were on the same page. I adored you for so long.
Love shattered. Oh no.
Yeah. Insert heartbreaking emoji here. This is just devastating.
Look, I also want to give credit where credit is due. When somebody does a good job, I don't want to sit there and
I see you're building him up for the big slam at the end. No, all right, I'm back on board.
Okay. So from an infrastructure as code concept, you can replicate your environments perfectly. Several times over, and with the magic that is infrastructure as code, you can take a development environment, you can figure out what it is that's important, you can work with your development team, you can get your development environment perfectly constructed as infrastructure as code, and then once you've got it in that format, you figure out which variables you want to then create to make your production environment. Do you want to ramp up the size of your EC2 instances? Do you want to have a larger RDS backend? Do you need fatter pipes in between everything so that communication can be more efficient and more expensive? Once you've figured out what your variables are, you can create your dev environment, you can create your production environment, you can create your UAT, your perf, and your staging. All of these different environments that are tuned to different parameters and different needs of the developer. Your performance environment, you've got to beat the hell out of. So you need to have big boxes with fat pipes in between everything so that you can run it. Will it be expensive? Yes, but through the magic of IAC, you can then immediately tear it down. So you've got a production environment that's up and running, in perpetuity, and that's a standard run rate. And your perf environment, which is going to be similarly sized, can be spun up, tested, grab your metrics from it, and then tear the whole thing down again. So the mutability of your environments becomes much easier to deploy. You're not creating a performance environment on-prem using hardware. You're creating it. You're basically creating an ephemeral environment that you can stop paying the bill on.
Chris, one of the things I always love about this concept, right? Whether this is like templatized deployment of infrastructure from old GUI tools or full IAC from this, is that if I properly train my security and compliance teams around this, I can do my compliance checks on the code, right?
Yep.
And not everything, but a good deal of it. That means that if I have to stamp out 50 production environments, I compliance check one code template. And as long as that meets all of my security and compliance regulations, the assumption can be that the 50 deployments of it will also do that. So this can streamline a lot of your processes by centralizing and saying, I'm going to replicate this exactly.
And to the point of like regulatory adherence, the regulators love this kind of stuff because you can just say everything is based on here. These are our drift detection parameters. Nothing is allowed to deviate without flagging an alarm per this piece of code here. You're literally pointing at the policy and showing them how it is working via the logs. Instead of, oh, well, we've got a 3-ring binder and Steve comes in on Fridays and he double checks everything twice. That is no bueno. Okay, so in the HashiCorp configuration language, there are basically 3 sections that you want to look at when you're looking at a configuration file. You've got your block, your parameters, and your arguments. The block is the thing that you're trying to create. That can either be data, like a dictionary, or it can be a resource, or it can be there's a number of different block types, and that is your large generic container that represents a configuration of some kind. And to get more into it, we've got I'm just going to run this out. We've got the block name, the resource type, and then the resource name. So the block name is what Terraform uses to figure out, okay, what am I doing with this piece of information? Is it an output? Is it a resource? Is it something that I'm going to be passing into another module? What am I doing with it? The resource type is specific to a particular provider. AWS instance is known by the AWS provider to mean, oh, I'm going to be creating an EC2 instance. So that's the definition of it. It defines what the block is going to be doing. And then the resource name is your variable generic name that it can be anything. It can be, Joe's happy server, it can be Chris's database or whatever like that. That's the variable name that you're assigning the resource in your larger code. And you can reference that. You can reference that name when you're talking about it in another piece. So in this instance, we've stood up a EC2 instance. We're pulling so it requires 2 pieces of input. It needs the AMI type for the region that it lives in, and it requires the instance type. How big does it need to be? With these 3 lines of code, you can create an EC2 instance you can spin up a server. It's madness. I mean, for somebody like me, that like when we needed to spin up a server 20 years ago, it was procure the system, it was do this, it was do that. Now it's 3 lines of code, run, and 5 seconds later it's up and running. These are the pieces that you then Lego together to make a larger environment. You grab an EC2 instance, you grab a VPC definition, you grab a security gateway, you grab a routing protocol, you use Route 53 and set up your DNS, and then all of a sudden you're running an entire data center from code, from little ones and zeros floating through the ether. It's a fascinating time we live in.
Chris, would you say it's stupendous?
Well, that was Joe's word to use. I would have to come up with something else.
A better word. No, that makes sense.
Chris, this HashiCorp language here, it doesn't look like I have to go and learn like a fully new language. It looks like maybe I'm mistaken, but there are some parallels. Like that almost looks like a Python dictionary you were just showing with 2 key value pairs in it. Oh,
it totally does. So yes, it is. The HashiCorp configuration language, again, starts off simplistically, but becomes complex the more you learn it. It's easy to learn, difficult to master. There's a lot more to it. standing up one resource is very easy. Standing up an entire environment that is dependent upon modules and variable inputs and then outputs other things to another module that then feeds off of it to give you more information back from a third party or something, that's where you get complex. And what I like about it is that you start off simple. You're like literally the very first training wheels program that HashiCorp's offers from the website is this is how you set up your environment, set up your AWS configure. All of the things in the demo slide is set up to walk through via the HashiCorp's website. And then you start with this, and then you get more and more complex. Pretty soon, you're setting up Kubernetes instances. You're embedding Helm charts. You're referencing stuff from the outside. It gets really slick, and it can become as complicated as you want it to be, or as simple as you want it to be. So this is where I talk about what you can and cannot get away with from a HashiCorp perspective. There's a thing called a state file, and a state file is where after you've run your Terraform apply and your Terraform plan, and your environment has been spun up, there is this artifact of that called the state file. And inside of that state file is all of the information of how your environment is running, including any passwords that you've passed into it, including a lot of really, really pertinent and private information that you do not want people to have access to. You can store that state file in your GitHub repository, which is public. You shouldn't. Much like this guy right here, yes, you can, you shouldn't do it. What you want to do is you want to have a git ignore file that ignores your star.tf state file, but what you should do even better is take that state file and put it into a private S3 bucket, or use Terraform Cloud for version controlling if you're running with a large team. There's a lot of best practices around state that a neophyte to Terraform will forget or overlook or leave in a public repo and get their configuration access key stolen, and then all of a sudden they're running a $2 million a second crypto farm.
So I guess considering that these two gentlemen on the right are Marines, the moral of the story here is don't be a dumb jarhead.
And because you are an ex-jarhead, you are allowed to say that. I am not. So the variables is the process of creating your variables is how you figure out how to abstract. What you don't want to do is you don't want to have this piece of code on the left, or actually, wait. Oh, so what I did was I actually removed several slides because this needed to be short and succinct. So before this, I actually had the original. I had this up as the original, and then I started abstracting it out and pulling it into the different variable files. So the resource instance and Terraform server are then turned into variables for the AMI, the instance type, and the project name. That variable file is a different file, and it sits elsewhere. And depending upon what you're trying to stand up, your UAT environment, your dev environment, your production environment, you reference that in your main.tf, and then that pulls that information. And there's different ways that you can actually automate even that process. You don't have to go in and manually say, okay, use prod or use dev or use UAT. You can say, if this has this tag, then reference the variables file for prod, for UAT, for dev. And then as everything gets stood up, you can start abstracting further and further layers out of it. So this is a really fun slide to like start doing. So in the demo, what I do is I actually build out. I start with standing up an EC2 instance, and then I do a modification to it where it doesn't tear down the instance and it starts adding tagging and naming to it. And basically, I start with an EC2 instance and then start fleshing it out further and further and further, adding more instances to the environment, creating an auto scaling group, and then manually going in and deleting one of the servers and watching it reheal itself and spin the information back up. So that's what we do in the demo. Oh, perfect. There we go.
That's the next Tech Deck Karaoke episode where we have Joe do the whole demo.
Well, I didn't want to give him like the Yeah, no, that's for anybody that hasn't actually been exposed to Terraform for at least a brief period of time. Running the actual demo itself would have been too much.
So you took it easy on him. Did I summarize that properly?
I took it so easy on him.
All right, you're back in the good graces, Chris. Here we are.
The thing I love about this stuff is it's not just that it is easy to learn and get started, but it's that your knowledge can build up in fairly logical blocks, but you can see results quick, right? When you first go in, you can just define the variable var equals 15, whatever it is. You don't have to worry about how to use that. But as you said, next layer, you'll abstract more, and the next layer, you'll abstract more. I remember when I was dabbling briefly with Python, it was, I'd go in and write an entire application as one stupid long flow of script. And then and then I'd finish that and I'm like, this is cool, it works. And then you think about it, it's like, well, if I broke that down into modules and functions that called one another, it'd be more logical, more portable, more this. And so you just build that next layer, build onto that, and continue.
There are actually a lot of similar concepts that you can port from ACL into Python and vice versa. As I was learning HCL, I was like, oh, that's just like a Python function. Oh, that's just like a dictionary. They have different words for them in HCL, but all of the concepts carry through. You cannot. So HCL has its own pre-baked functions. You cannot make a function on the fly and create parameters and arguments for it. There are functions that have been pre-built, and you can't make your own. But there's a lot of them that you can leverage to do things. Which is why it's not a general language, a generalized language. It's a specified language. But there are a lot of similarities. I'm enjoying it. There's a fantastic book for anybody that wants to get started. It's called Terraform Up and Running, which walks through that exact process. Starting off with do your EC2 instance. Oh, okay, and walks you through that process. And I think like by chapter 4, you've got prod, UAT, and perf running with multiple tagged environments, and you send one commit change to one branch in your GitHub repo, and it modifies your dev environment, and then you just change the tag, and all of a sudden your production volume environments, and that's just by chapter 4. It's fairly fun.
That's awesome. And you can tell that this is not a university course that you're watching, because Chris didn't write the book and he's not going to mandate that you buy it to take his course.
That is correct. Yes. I can't remember who wrote it, but it's from O'Reilly, and I don't make any money from O'Reilly, but it's called Terraform Up and Running. And I think they're in their 3rd edition now.
And look at you having it handy. Wow.
Yep.
So Miss Schaefer, what are you motivated now to go learn Terraform HCL? Is that what you're thinking?
I just wrote down the title. I'm in. I'm motivated. I can tell you 15 minutes ago I was not motivated. Deterred really would probably be the better word.
Oh.
But now, miraculously, stupendously, I am motivated. I don't know if you noticed, but Louis got out of his chair. He was so excited. So
I did not realize that we were picking words that we were going to use. That we should have, each 3 of us, figured out how we're going to somebody else pick a word that we then have to insert into our flow somehow.
There's a very large cloud provider. I will not tell you which one, but it's one of the 3, and they do that on their earnings call. Their leadership picks a word, and they have to insert it somehow, and I think that is fun. So yeah,
the
I'm
word
in.
Is canoe. Use the word canoe in the earnings call.
It's almost like the Super Troopers meow thing, right? Like you just gotta
exactly.
throw this in and see if it gets through.
You will notice, Yeah.
Like a
Chris,
canoe
the
going
premise
down the
of the
river.
show is we're supposed to make fun of Joe, and since you left me alone, I had to pick words. I just had to do it.
It wasn't stupendous what you did.
There should be a drinking game. I see what we've done here. Anytime you hear stupendous, start drinking. Yeah.
The last talk that Joe and I did, or was it the last talk? Well, one of the previous talks that Joe and I did together was when Joe was moving to the farm, and I had a bunch of people that wanted to know what was his thought process? Why did he want to do it? What was going on? And I struggled mightily with the title of the of said presentation.
Yeah.
We came up with about 4 or 5 working titles, and I think we finally settled on From Cloud Transformation to Bovine Insemination, a tale of Joe Onisick.
You know what always gives me the giggles? It's that people think I have a thought process.
That is cute. That is very sweet and endearing that people would think that. Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
There's like zero filter between idea and action in the Joe world. It's just done.
It also continues to shock me how many people are on some type of communication about Joe Onisick of like, what's happening now? You know? Yeah.
He's like the Carmen Sandiego of the tech world.
Yeah. Yeah. Ooh. All right. More drinking games coming up. All right. More to come. So
that brings us to the moment of truth, Sabrina. That does. Where are we going with this? Your favorite part of the show?
Oh boy. You know, this is a tough one, Joe. This is I'm struggling on who to pick. I don't know. No, this is very easy. Chris, you win this hands down. I can't even. Hands down. No way. Joe, you botched the whole thing. No, you didn't. All right. I won't be as mean. I feel like I'm overcompensating for some people, but you really did do a good job. And I'll tell you, we didn't give you kudos to this, but your end segue was beautiful. Although I was hoping you were going to say something like, and that's how we make friends all around the world, or whatever that last tagline is, Chris, on your slide. But your transitions were smooth. The content was right on. I mean, in the middle of it, Chris even texts me, I made this way too easy. And I'm like, well, all right. But no, truly all in all, Chris, you're funny. You're freaking brilliant. You're so much fun, and it helps that you're an amazing, good person. So hands down, you get this one.
You know, the real differentiator that clinched the win for you, Chris, versus me, is that you knew what you were talking about, and I think that really does.
Yeah, well, that does help every once in a while. Yeah.
It's not the destination; it's the friends we made along the way.
Oh, that's what I was hoping you would say. It's the friends we made along the way. You know, yeah. The friends we hazed along the way. You know, yeah, exactly.
The friends we've made fun of along the way.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Chris, this was a pleasure, as I knew it was going to be, having you on. Absolutely appreciate it. I think the whole concept of infrastructure as code is something everyone needs to start getting their feet wet with, if they're not already wet with it. And I think it fits a lot of the theme of the guests we've had on this show. Is ties in really nicely with a lot of other areas. So thank you for bringing relevant content and a great first step into your new role as a dev advocate.
It's funny. I haven't even started yet, and I'm already extolling the virtues of the company. So I'll put this in as my first piece of content.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've got this role in your heart, right? You've always been there supporting other technologists, helping them grow, helping them learn, helping them build their careers. And I think that's the key to great advocacy, right?
Agreed. Yeah. It's all boats rise with the tide. And I love helping all of the new folks that are coming into the business, level up and study. I mean, I love studying. If I'm not doing this, I'm off reading a book somewhere, doing something like that. So why not do it where everybody else can see us doing it, so that they can say, oh, hey, I could do that too.
That's exactly it. Speaking my love language, I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
Hearts.
And Miss Schaefer, as always, your presence was tolerated.
We even got a little Louis here. We got a little Louis appearance, His publicist will be calling you shortly for that check, but
poke his head up, right? I forget we do have to pay some pretty serious royalties every time he shows his big ears.
Does he have a SAC card?
He does not. He needs one now. Poor guy. Well, thanks for another episode. What's that?
Hey, team.
Thank you very much, Chris. And thank you all for joining and watching. We appreciate your suffering on our behalf.
That's right.
It was a unmitigated pleasure.
I see what you did there. See you next time.